Every voice carries a story, every story carries a lesson, and every lesson can become a lifeline. On Voices of Resiliency, we sit down with warriors, healers, leaders, and everyday people who have walked through fire and fire.
All right, here we are, episode 1 of Voices of Resiliency. We are excited about this new season, and this season is designed to alternate between the foundational conversations and lived experiences, creating a progression from definition to real-world application of resilience. I'm here with my co-host, Michael Pellegrino, who is the man, the myth, the legend, and he is going to tell us what resilience really means. So, Michael, can you define resilience beyond toughness, introduce the core philosophy, adaptation, recovery, and purpose for me? Kind of give everybody an idea of what this season is going to be about.
Kris, I'm so excited, and you are the man, the myth, and the legend. So I'm going to go right back at you. I'm just so proud to be a part of this. And what are we going to talk about during this whole series? And that's the key here. And the key is to make sure that, first of all, that nobody suffers in silence. I think that's really, really important for us as a mission, so that, you and I, we can go back and forth and we can define all these things, but we want to make sure that if anybody is feeling a certain way, that they get the help and they reach out to us, because we have the resources to get them the help. Don't you agree, my friend?
I think so. I think that's probably a really profound statement, is
Absolutely.
for us to be able to share resilient people and our resilient stories, but also let people know that we're only resilient because of other people supporting us. And that's what makes us get through those tough times when things are really dark, and I know that's kind of why we set ourselves in a darker situation for this, because we want it to become something of a light. And we want people to recognize that when we have our show on, the guest on, we want them to be able to see the difference. But this is like our little bullpen of us talking and kind of getting the whole thing. So I think you're right on point. So tell me what resiliency means to you personally, if you could summarize it in one statement.
Well, I think it's the ability to bounce back and actually move forward. So we can sit here and we can pretend that we have an egg in one hand and a tennis ball in the other. And which one do we want to be, Kris? Obviously, we want to be the tennis ball. We want to be able to bounce back, not the egg that's going to splat. But more importantly, we can sit here and bounce back all day long. But it's important to understand that we not only need to bounce back, but we need to move forward. It's about progression. Life is not going to be simple. It's not going to give you everything that is just that you're expecting. And to have that adversity is kind of like that tree that's growing in the ground. That tree has to have a good rooting system first before it grows. If not, when the wind blows, when that adversity comes, what's going to happen? It's just going to fall right over.
Yeah, without a foundation, there's really nothing to build on and there's nothing to grow from. But that foundation can be really tough to build, don't you think? I mean, to me, you're probably one of the most resilient people I've ever met for what you do now, based on what you used to do, and probably the most difficult job in the world.
It's funny that you say that, because I get down on myself and I have that negative self-talk a lot, and going back and forth. And whenever I talk, I need to make sure that I hear myself talk, because the most important person that needs to hear what I have to say is myself, and getting into that mindset, because we can, it's very easy to get down and hit that negative spiral. But I love the term, and we have this saying in Resilient Minds that's, catch yourself catching yourself. If you can't first self-identify that you're going down that slippery slope, then everything after that is kind of useless from there. So it's important to be able to self-identify first, be able to catch yourself, and be able to stop that spiral. So like I said, the most important thing is to make sure that we are, we're self-aware, and awareness is important.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, you definitely have to understand too that I think everybody has that self-talk, and I think there's nobody out there that is worse to themselves than they are to other people. Like, we all have the negative self-talk inside us, and we're all very hard on ourselves. And I know, like, having compassion for others is easy, but having compassion for yourself is very difficult. And you having built Voices of Resilient, both actually, Voices of Resiliency and Resilient Minds on the front lines, it's obviously become a staple in your life. And I think one of the big things you say is that pause and, making sure that you're not just going to regurgitate the negative things you're saying to yourself, but rather give people a better version. Is that something of a connection that you have between those two things?
Well, yeah, it's easy for me to help other people, but the hardest person to help is myself sometimes. It's kind of like, okay, I know that I need to do these certain things, but it's easy for me to tell somebody else it. And it's like those conversations. How do those conversations usually go when you're talking to somebody else? They go pretty good because you're there to support them, you're there to give them advice, you're there for their supporting. But how about those self conversations, those conversations you have with yourself? You did this and you did that and you're not that good, and you get into your own mind and you get into that OODA loop of yours. I know I do it all the time. And being able to understand how I need to get out of that OODA loop, how I need to get out of my own thoughts, because those thoughts are what really control everything. So having control of our thoughts and our mind is probably the easiest thing that we'll talk about during this season, but it's the hardest thing to do, Kris.
Certainly is. And I actually have, a line in one of my songs recently that says, I am not my thoughts. I'm the one who hears them. And I think it's very profound to know that, because your thoughts are not who you are, but they're rather you're the one listening to those thoughts. And that's why, we say, I have my body, but that doesn't mean we are the body. That it just means the body is ours. It's what we are using. So it's important to recognize the separation of the thoughts that come through versus the real truth that is happening. And I think, when an alignment happens and you get those things together, you can kind of filter. And as you said, it's really easy to help other people. On my worst day, I can always help someone and be amazing for that person. But then as soon as I
Yeah.
hang up with them, or as soon as I, stop talking, I go right back into my, it comes from nowhere. It's not even a thing that any of us have real power over. We don't even have the choice. We just simply fall prey to it if we aren't aware of the fact that we're the one listening to our thoughts, not the thoughts itself. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think there's a study that was done, and that study was over 80% of the internal conversations with ourselves are negative. And that's
Wow.
a high number. Over 80%. Now, what that exact number is, I don't know. But thinking about it, those conversations aren't what we really want to tell ourselves, because again, we get in our own mind. And I have so many different stories, and I know that we're going to be telling a lot of stories over the season. But just being a police officer and doing that for over 25 years and going to other calls and answering those calls and kind of sticking everybody else's trauma in my bag and carrying that along with me. And then, you're going to the next call and you're going to the next call. And then, obviously you're dealing with different situations. You're dealing with people. And when you deal with people, there's going to be certain conversations that may be negative or positive. And being able to turn them around and understand, okay, I need to see things from other people's lenses, other people's perspective. And when I figured that out, I think I became more understanding, more empathetic, more compassionate, understanding that not everybody sees the world through my lens and not everybody sees the world through somebody else's lens, but being able to understand one another. I think that's key.
Now, speaking of which, as a police officer for so many years, and obviously being up in the city and, seeing your fair share of horrible things, how are you able to be resilient from person to person and not let what just happened from the previous call affect the next call? Because to me, that's got to be much of an art form to practice and to create that kind of discipline, because I can't imagine going and seeing some horrific situation, which you obviously have had to see, and then having to take another call and go in with the same equal personality and neutral stance that you had prior to the day starting. It has to compound, it has to build. And so how do you shake all that off and start fresh? Or is that something that's always a work in progress.
It always is a work in progress. It's being able to take control of your mind, and it's not easy. And I know from my perspective, getting that back to back to back to back calls, and just seeing the horrible things, because nobody's really calling you to say, "Oh, you know what, it's a great day. Why don't you come over and hang out?" No, that's not why they're calling you. They're calling you because they've lost control of their life, because something has happened traumatic in their life, and now you have to go and fix it. So I'm going to talk about this in a whole different organizational stress as well too, because this happens in anywhere from Fortune 500 companies all the way to organizations like police departments, military, fire. Because again, it's not, no one person is immune to tragedy or what they have seen, or trauma, because trauma doesn't have a price tag on it, and it comes in all different shapes and sizes.
Doesn't discriminate.
The traumas that I dealt the traumas that I dealt with were a little bit different, but some of the statistics that were talked about in the law enforcement and the military world, and all these things is, the average person may see maybe four or five traumas in their lifetime. Whereas in this profession, in the first responder profession, in the military profession, you may have 5 or 6 a month.
Yeah.
Now, times that by 12 months,
Yeah.
times that by 12 months, times that by 25 years.
Yeah.
So now you think of all that compounded cumulative trauma that you've dealt with, and now you go home, and now you have to be mom, dad, aunt, uncle, brother, sister. You put the title in front of it. And I can remember, and I told my wife this not too long ago, I can remember sitting in the driveway coming home from work. And maybe she had somebody in the house, maybe she didn't, it didn't matter. But I would sit in the driveway because I wasn't ready to go inside yet. I wasn't ready
Right.
to talk about my day. I wasn't ready just to face anybody, because I was just still trying to come down from the day. And
Yeah.
we talk about the green zone and the red zone in Resilient Minds. We talk about constantly the gas pedal on, and now you come down and you have the brake pedal on, and you're constantly going on the emotional roller coaster. How do you get back into that green zone and be a human again after all the things that you've seen during the day, after all the things that you have dealt with during the day, and try to get back into the window of tolerance? And you have to go home and have a conversation, or have a tough conversation. And now all of a sudden, somebody says something to you, or you get cut off on your ride home, and you completely go ballistic. Well, it wasn't because somebody cut you off, Kris. It was all those things, all that cumulative trauma that happened during the day, that now you go home and your wife or your girlfriend or whoever tells you, I need you to take the garbage out, and you flip out. Why
Right.
is that?
Right. Well, I mean, resiliency training is a big part of being a police officer, right? You guys actually have that as something that you do and train each other in practice. But I can't even imagine like witnessing and being a part of the amount of traumas that you have to go through each day, and then coming home, and regardless of what you're walking into, you somehow have to clean the slate like an Etch-a-Sketch and somehow get yourself. I mean, but there's no way to do that I'm aware of in a blink of an eye, maybe through training and practice. But you're talking about like all your emotions, cortisol release, everything that's gone on. And now all of a sudden you got to walk in and be like, "Hey honey, what's for dinner?" And act completely normal. And so are you hiding it a lot of times? Are you suppressing it all? Or do you figure out a methodology that works for getting rid of it so that you can move through it, and so that you can get past it, so that you can have somewhat of a normal life? Because it's not like you don't have to get back up the next day and go back to work.
Exactly. And you make so many great points in there. And it's just getting up that one more time. Your minds are, my mind and all our minds work like video recorders. Back in the day, a VCR, you could fast forward, you could rewind, you could stop, you can pause, you have all them thoughts in your minds, and they're constantly going around and around. So being able to control your mind is such a tough thing. But one of the tools, and one of the things that I have really, really utilized in my life, is it wasn't until later in my career that I kind of figured this out, was things to be grateful for. How can I show gratitude? How can I use random acts of kindness to my own benefit, not for somebody else, even though somebody else is benefiting from that. How can I be the person to give them something that just makes their day a little bit brighter? And these are all the things that I utilize in my life day after day after day now to not only make the world a little bit better, but to make myself a little bit better each day. And that's the key, is picking a tool. And these are the tools that we teach over in our class. These are the ones we talk about. These are the ones that really resonate with people. And it's not positive toxicity. It's trained skills that really have been research based, that say these things work. And if you utilize these things, you will come out of that hole just a little bit quicker.
So can I ask you about 5 questions just to get answers of what it would, to give everybody kind of an idea of what you're talking about? Because we haven't been through the resiliency training. I have personally, because I'm, I guess, just through sheer life, resiliency. But let's see. Number one, when you hear the word resiliency, what does it mean to you personally?
Wow, that's a deep question. What does resiliency? It means just the ability to get up one more time. I don't have to be perfect. The only thing I have to do in my life is be 1% better than I was yesterday. If I can
Keep
just
going.
keep going. And I always like to say life is not about winning and losing. It's about living and learning. And if we're constantly living and learning, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to fall short. I fall short every day, and I know we all do. It's being able to think about those things, come back from those things, and become more resilient because of those things.
So resiliency is something that's built upon. You aren't just resilient from the beginning. You have to earn it over a long period of time of one more time, one more time,
One,
one more time. That makes a lot
yes,
of sense. Can you take us to a moment in your life where your resiliency was truly tested?
man, I got a lot of them moments.
There's got to be one that stands out above the rest, I'm sure.
There was a time where I was living in people's spare bedrooms, I had less than $5 in my bank account. I could remember those times where, times were tough. And I refused to go to mom and dad. My house was rented out, and I just had gone through a pretty traumatic breakup. And it just was just something that, for me, it was all about the relationship. It just didn't turn out the way I wanted it to, but things got better. And it's like, I learned from there, being resilient. It's just not about the situation. It was about how I handled the situation, how I just was able to get up and do what I needed to do to make sure that that happened. But one of the things that we know, Kris, and this is the great thing that I want all our listeners to know, is I wasn't always resilient. I learned how to be resilient. And we know, because of the research that we have done through our company, is that the research shows that resiliency can be learned. And that's the great thing. It doesn't matter if you're a young person or you're in your 80s or 90s. I remember, doing this class, and we had a person that was in his 80s, and he goes, "I wish I had this in my these 30s and 40s. I maybe not have gotten divorced 9 times, but
Yeah.
these are the things that we live and we learn." So each of those times we bounce back from them. But for me, I can go on storytelling, probably 100 different incidents that happened in my life. But more importantly, it was only 1% of the problem how it happened to me. It was 99% of the problem is how I handled it.
That's a great answer. I think that would have won Jeopardy for sure, or question, I guess, on Jeopardy. But so what helped you keep going when it was uncertain and when you felt overwhelmed? Was there like something inside you, or was it something that someone else did for you, or did you just have the belief that you could always make it and keep going?
For me, it's about one thing. It's about my God and my faith. So for me, it's always about, okay, today was a storm. It was a bad storm, but I know tomorrow the storm will end, or maybe the next day the storm will end.
Right.
Whatever, I know that storm will end. So it's just putting in perspective. Okay, we call it embracing the suck. You have to embrace the suck, and that's what one of our facilitators, and I love some of his sayings, and he always used that saying. Life isn't going to give you what all the things that you expect. Life's going to give you, it's going to be messed up. But
Yeah.
it's important to understand, okay, how do we embrace that? How do we move forward? And it's just getting up one more time. It's just, those thoughts ruminate in your mind. And I can tell you, I can't even begin to tell you how they take you and you catastrophize over them and how they take you down that dark, dark circle. But for
Yes, they
me,
do.
I know when I'm going down that route, yeah,
There was
I
no,
need to
what,
make sure that I'm taking those deep breaths.
do you
I
ever
know
remember,
that I need to box breathe.
do you remember the movie Batman Returns with Christian Bale when he falls down in the well and his father goes and gets him? It's how he finds the Batcave.
Yes.
And there's a key line that he says
Yep.
in there that I've said to myself all the time. And he says, Bruce, why do we fall down? And he says, so that we can learn to pick ourselves up. And I say that to myself at least 1,000 times a day, every single day, because if you know what, if you just realize that you just have to keep picking yourself back up, it just has to be one more time, then you fall down and you're going to always keep going. And so to me, that helps me understand that resiliency is the only way. There is no other option. The only other option is to not get back up, which means, okay, that's not really a choice to me. I'm not going to ever do that. So what do you think?
It's
What
not.
do you think people misunderstand about resiliency or strength? Or what do you think that they perceive it as that's not accurate, that maybe is why they're not on the right track?
That they can never be resilient. And that's the negative mindset right there. They get into that catastrophizing. They become a victim. They be not a victor. They get into that thought process where you always say to yourself, why is this happening to me? In that victim mindset. Whereas the person who is more resilient or thinks about things in a different perspective will say, what am I supposed to learn from this? So really and truly, when you think about it, the person who is constantly saying, I can't become resilient, won't become resilient. It's kind of like that self talk. If you talk to yourself in a positive way and you can envision things and you can see those things happening, they will happen. And you can see, it works in the direct opposite as well, too. Those negative thoughts, you can see those negative thoughts happening too, because they're constantly happening over and over again because our mind goes right to them.
Well, I think we always are going to go to worst case scenario. I believe the brain is always trying to keep us safe and protect us from harm, but the heart is really what we're supposed to be listening to. That's always going to give us a position of love. The brain is more of a safety mechanism, but it's going to come up with all the worst case possible scenarios so that we're prepared for them. The problem with that is that now we have anxiety or stress about things that are never even going to happen anyway, because we've already made them happen for real in our brain. So as you can turn this guy off and turn this guy on, you can get on track. But in some situations, I think it's a lot more difficult than others. And I'm sure there's probably been some in your life that you had to, it took you a minute to get back up. Like, I think of Mike Tyson, and he knocked people out or knocked people down. They didn't just jump back up on their feet, right? They had to use the ropes and climb. Was there ever a situation like that for you? Because I know that our very first guest is a very special guest and her situation is extraordinary. And to me, it would have been like being hit with a left and a right by Mike Tyson. And for her to get back up and become resilient, absolutely, absolutely just a game changer, inspirational. So give me your thoughts and ideas and then tell us about our first guest while you're at it.
Yeah, no, I think of what Rocky Balboa said, and he said it's not how hard you can get hit. It's about hard or how not how hard you can hit, but how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done. And that to me, I think about that over and over again because our first guest, I mean, she's not only a dear friend of mine, her and her husband, but they are probably two of the most resilient people. And I can't wait for the world to meet them if they haven't met them already. And Lori and Dr. Elon, I mean, what they have done with their nonprofit in making our schools safe is just the epitome of resiliency. For those who don't know, their daughter was the first one shot at Parkland in at Marjorie Stoneman down in South Florida, and how they turned their pain into a mission. and how they coined the phrase time equals life. And I know, Kris, that was a really heavy conversation, but I don't even want to even put any hints out there because it is a really good conversation. And Lori tells her story from that minute when she received that telephone call to what she's doing now. And absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I mean, and I want everyone to know that this first episode of our first guest is probably going to be the heaviest, but we wanted to go ahead and put out the strongest the strongest form of resiliency that we could ever come up with, maybe that anyone could ever come up with, and probably one of the most resilient people ever that I've ever met. And yeah, the conversation is a heavy conversation, but you know what? I'm inspired every day by the story. I'm inspired by the people. I'm inspired by Alyssa, and, so inspired that I wrote a song, and turning the 8 sideways. And now Alyssa is infinity is about as good as it gets to me. And I'll never, ever forget this conversation with Lori and how, I mean, I like to believe I'm an experienced host who can keep myself together for any conversation, but I was not okay.
Sure.
It was not okay. It was so everything I could do to get this. I couldn't formulate a thought, let alone a word. And here she was sitting here having this amazing conversation, and I can't wait for people to hear this. So go ahead and introduce Lori so that they know that that's what's coming up.
Yeah, no, Dr. Elon and Lori Aldahef are two of the most amazing people doing some of the most amazing things. And, we're going to talk about Alyssa's Law. And Alyssa's Law, we were just in DC not too long ago and lobbying for that law and trying to have minimum standards for school safety. Because again, it's having those minimum standards. We talk about all the things that has been done in the schools, especially with the fire protection, having so many fire alarm fire drills a month in the schools. But when's the last person that, I hate to say it, but when's the last person that was killed in the school? It was a long time ago for fire. But how many people have been killed since in school shootings? So Lori and Dr. Elon are taking this on a national level, and I really can't wait to hear for the world to hear from them, because I think this episode is going to be pretty special, Kris.
Yes, and I'd like to go ahead and say it one more time. Not every episode that we're going to deliver is going to involve this much emotion. So for those of you who are parents, you need to hear this. Everyone needs to hear this. But we have other resilient people that are on the show this season that are not going to be. So this one may be our tearjerker episode. I know it is for me, but I think the rest of the people come from a lot of perspective differently for the resiliency and why they're resilient. So this one's going to be pretty heavy, but I guarantee you'll walk away from it feeling a whole different way about life and a whole different way about people and about resiliency.
No doubt, Kris. I look forward and stand by next week.
Here it comes.
Every voice carries a story. Every story carries a lesson. And every lesson can become a lifeline. On Voices of Resiliency, we sit down with warriors, healers, leaders, and everyday people who have walked through fire and found a way.